debate. Thanks to a partnership with the Clean Elections Commission, the Arizona Media Association, and Bitfire Studios, we're working to make sure these 2024 debates are the most accessible in Arizona history across local TV stations, radio stations, and digital platforms, including support from local newspapers.
Before we get to the rules for this debate, we want to pause and invite both candidates to the stage. Democratic candidate Ruben Gallego and Republican candidate Kari Lake. We thank you both for being here. We do want, for the benefit of voters watching or listening from home, to briefly explain the agreed-upon rules for the hour ahead. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement and 1 minute for a closing statement. Candidates have drawn straws to determine that order. Throughout the debate, we will pose questions to each candidate, allow them to answer, and then make sure the other candidate has a chance to respond. Whenever a question is directed to a specific candidate, only that candidate's microphone will be open. At all other times, every microphone will be open.
Both candidates have been invited to join this debate because they received at least 1% of the total ballots cast in the primary election. We've used this guideline for all of our general election debates in Arizona this fall. We've identified the topics that lead for voters in Arizona. We'll spend more time on those key issues, and we'll try to get to as many of the other topics as time allows. Also, no candidate has been given advance access to any of the questions. With that, let's get to the opening statements. Mr. Gallego, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. I'm Ruben Gallego, a husband, father, Marine combat veteran, and a proud Arizonan. I look forward to being your U.S. Senator. I was raised by a single mom on the south side of Chicago, and she raised us all on a secretary's salary. I slept on the floor so my sisters could have their own bed. And my first bedroom, and my first bed was actually my college dorm room bed. I worked every job I could find, much like many Arizonans do now, just to make sure they could help out, whether it was construction, meatpacking factory, drywalling, whatever I could do, just to help a little more. I got into Harvard and also joined the Marine Corps. Enlisted, went to Iraq and served with the best men I've ever met. Lima Company 325. And there, I saw some of the hardest days of combat and lost some close friends. But I did learn that in war, there are no Democrats, no Republicans, just young men and women trying to live one more day and be better Americans. And that's what I've learned this whole time I've been traveling the state, talking to Democrats, Republicans. They just want a better future. By contrast, we're going to see and talk to somebody who has really failed the basic test of honesty. She has lied to Arizonans about the 2022 election. She has said that she still is the rightful governor of Arizona. She has lied about fellow Republicans to the point where they had to go get bodyguards because of all the threats that she created. We are at a crossroads, Arizona. We need to make sure that we ensure our water rights, we continue this great growth in infrastructure, and that we actually protect abortion rights. That's where we need to go. And that's the options we have in front of us.
Okay, thank you. Kari Lake, you have 2 minutes, please.
Arizona, it's so good to be back with you where our relationship began, right here in your home. And thank you for tuning in tonight for this important debate. It reminds me of the day I drove into town in 1994. I was 24 years old. I bought a house for $88,000, a 3-bedroom home. Arizona was affordable back then. Arizona was safe back then. And Arizona was a place everyone wanted to come to live. And now, unfortunately, we're not seeing that anymore. Arizona has become unaffordable and unsafe because of career politicians who have voted against our needs and what's important for our safety. We are going to be hearing tonight from somebody who's undergone an extreme makeover, to quote an old TV show, somebody who has voted with the most radical Democrats in Washington, D.C. to tear open our borders that were delivered to him in a safe way. with President Trump securing our border, who has torn apart our economy, and who has made our children and our lives less safe. And so tonight we're going to watch as somebody tries to reinvent himself, somebody who used to be a member of the Progressive Caucus, somebody who has destroyed the very congressional district that he has served for the past 10 years, where homelessness is on the rise. It's the fastest growing homeless population, where quality of life is diminished. We want to get back to the days where Arizona was affordable and safe. And when we put America first, we can do that. We need to put our country over our party. That's what we need to do, country over party, and that's what America First is all about. Unfortunately, for the man I'm standing on the stage with tonight, he took an oath to protect us from enemies foreign and domestic, and we've seen enemies coming across our border. We've had 20 million people pour across our border. Our border is wide open. Murderers have come in, criminals have come in, and terrorists have come in. I want to go to Washington, D.C. and help President Trump secure the border, bring back that strong Trump economy, make it so that we can have the American dream once again for our young people who feel that they don't have access to the American dream. I'm looking forward to the debate tonight, and I thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. And we are going to start with the border this evening. And as this is an intricate issue, we have separated this topic into two categories: border security and immigration reform. Mr. Gallego, you were one of the earliest and most emphatic critics of a border wall. Has your perspective changed on that? How much of a role does a border wall need to play in an overall security package? You have 2 minutes.
Well, I think a border wall is important to a security package, but it also has to be coupled with technology, manpower, and then laws that come behind that. So this is why it was important that that the border security compromise bill passed, because it had a lot of those elements. And I have voted for border walls in the past, and actually hundreds of miles with the border walls, because where appropriate, with the proper manpower and staffing, it does work. What doesn't work is when you put a border wall without the manpower and without the actual laws that you need to implement behind it, because then it doesn't end up being of any use and it's just costing us more money. So this is why we focus on things such as the border security bill, right? Something that was extremely important. It was a compromise between the most conservative Republicans and Democrats to make sure that we brought some effort. This is something that the Border Patrol wanted and endorsed. It would have brought thousands of Border Patrol agents, thousands of asylum judges, thousands of ICE agents, as well as the technology that we needed at our ports of entries. And this is stuff that I heard from our Border Patrol union. I heard from the mayors that I've visited down there, our county officials, and they needed this and they wanted this. This is why it was very, very sad that Kari Lake came out and was against that bill. Even after they was carved off between the foreign policy aid and just solely standing, she was still against it. Not because there was a better option, but because she needs it. She needs this to be a border problem, because that solution would have brought a lot of the problems that we have under control. And look, from day one, I've worked in a bipartisan manner when it comes to this. One of the first things that I did when I got to Congress, I worked with Congresswoman Martha McSally, a Republican from Southern Arizona, to get veterans to join Border Patrol. Even recently, I signed on to a bill, the only Democrat signed to a bill, Representative Crenshaw of Texas, to get more federal law enforcement, make it easier for them to actually join Border Patrol, something that has been very difficult and something that the Border Patrol agents themselves told me they wanted to be able to do.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake,
Can I
2
respond to
minutes.
that really quickly?
I'm going to give you the 2 minutes, a full 2 minutes
Okay.
here, to talk about the border wall and can it upstand and withhold without adding extra security and billions on technology.
I just jotted down Ruben's exact quote. He called it the dumb, stupid border wall. He wrote an op-ed that said why we should never build Trump's wall ever. So we're getting the extreme makeover version of Ruben tonight. Ruben has voted against border security every step of the way. Remember, I covered the state for 27 years. I was in your home, and all that time we watched as career politicians said they were going to secure the border and give us border security, and they never did until President Trump came along and actually secured the border, but he had to do it with one hand tied behind his back because people like my opponent were fighting him every step of the way, would not give a penny for that border wall. That border wall keeps us safe. We've seen it here in Arizona because we've seen those areas where the border wall is there and people aren't coming through. Where there are gaps in it, people are pouring through. And Ruben Gallego has supported every step of the way Kamala Harris, the border czar, and Joe Biden's open border policy, which has ushered in 20 million million people illegally, including more than 400,000 convicted criminals, and they've done nothing to secure the border. The only piece of legislation that Mr. Gallego has put forth was not about border security. It was about removing the word illegal alien from anything in the federal government paperwork. He's more worried about semantics than our security. And right now, we know that we have terrorists that are coming through. We're worried about a potential terrorist attack on our home soil. We want to be able to go for a jog in the morning like Lake and Riley did and not have to worry about being killed, raped, and murdered. And we're not safe because of the people that have come in. Ruben Gallego has empowered the cartels. I want to finish the border wall. On day one, my first piece of legislation will be to fully fund and expedite the construction of the border wall. It's unfortunate we already paid for the construction materials to do that, but Ruben Gallego and Kamala Harris they sold that $325 million of border material for pennies on the dollar. They gave it away. We could have had that wall finished.
Mrs. Lake, in addition to finishing the wall, do you add security and technology? Do you spend on that as well?
Absolutely. I don't think we can do enough to secure our border. It is the most important issue facing Arizonans and facing our whole country. Every state is a border state right now because of this man's policies, this man's votes, which have been 100% open border. He sided with the cartels every step of the way and against the American people. And you and I are suffering because of it.
Thank you, Mrs. Lake. Mr. Gallego,
I'd like
a minute to respond.
To that. Yes.
And do you support open borders?
Absolutely not. I do not support open borders. A country that doesn't have a border they control is not a country. I absolutely agree with that. And to say that, I've been very proud of making sure that in my time in Congress, I have voted and brought thousands of Border Patrol agents to Arizona, have voted and funded hundreds of miles of border walls where needed, where our experts wanted it. This is why I'm supportive of the border enforcement bill, the compromise bill that was supported by Border Patrol. And Kari Lake, for still no reason why she can explain it, she can't explain it why she was against that bill. Now, this is why we have more support from border mayors than she does. As a matter of fact, there's one border mayor that started with her on the campaign, met with her in front of the border wall with her campaign sign, and now is supporting us because he knows that we're not just talk, we're not just rhetoric. We're here to bring the resources to actually control the border and not just use it as a talking point, which is what Kari Lake does.
Mrs. Lake, a minute to respond.
He voted against President Trump's national emergency on the border. He said the border's not that big of a deal in Arizona when he was talking to people who were donating money to his campaign and said he's not an expert on the border. We need somebody who understands the threat on the border, and I do. And President Trump does, and on day one, we're going to get busy undoing the damage caused by Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and Ruben Gallego, who's voted with them 100% of the time. Can you imagine voting with the Kamala Harris and Joe Biden 100% of the time, especially when it comes to the border? You know, this isn't just about an open border. We've got 20 million people pouring in. They're taking jobs, they're taking housing. This is why nobody can afford housing anymore, because we're having to compete with people who've come in illegally. I am completely opposed to an open border. I am 100% for legal immigration. My mother-in-law came here legally, and all of the incredible immigrants of this country who came here legally are horrified by the votes that my opponent has taken. They're horrified by what Kamala Harris has done. And by the way, that piece of legislation, thank you for reminding me, I am not for it, and it's because it would codify into law 5,000 people every day coming in illegally. That means 5,000 people every day would be pouring across our border illegally. That law did nothing to stop child sex trafficking. 350,000 children have been trafficked across our border since Ruben Gallego and Kamala Harris opened up that border. 350,000, and they've lost track of them.
Mrs. Lake, let's move to a specific question, please, on that topic. Are there any elements of that bipartisan border bill you would have supported?
Actually not, because it was not done properly. Okay. Listen, here's what happens in Washington, D.C. These guys meet in back rooms. They have an idea. They say, let's put a border deal together. Let's call it the Safe Border Act, whatever they call it, because they always call it something, and it's really usually the opposite. Then they throw a bunch of other stuff in there, and they never get to it. And the problem with this piece of legislation that I had a real problem with, Steve, was that they attached it to $115 billion in foreign money and more money, our money, Arizona's money, going overseas to kill people. And when they couldn't get this passed because there was no bipartisan support, they may have had 3 different people writing it and pushing this, but there was no bipartisan support. 3 people supporting it. The senators were not bipartisan behind it, and in the House they weren't supporting it either. And the people weren't supporting it. So what they did is they separated it out, and Ruben Gallego voted to send another $60 billion to Ukraine. And after he made that vote, he sashayed around the floor of Congress, waving a Ukrainian flag. I want to ask the veterans out there, can you ever imagine standing on the floor of Congress, standing anywhere, and waving the flag of another country? That is what this gentleman did. He sold us out. He sold us out to Ukraine. He spent $260 billion. He's voted for every penny of that, but he would not help President Trump build the border wall. Even when President Trump said to the Democrats, I want to make a deal when it comes to DACA. I want to make a deal when it comes to DACA. Let's make them citizens in exchange for helping me come up with money to build the border wall. And Ruben Gallego and the Democrats said no. They're using these DACA recipients as political pawns. I find that to be disgusting, Ruben. Why are you using them as pawns?
Mr.
Why
Gallego,
wouldn't you make a deal with President Trump?
Let me have you jump in about that, specifically
Sure.
about the Dreamers. What's your level of support?
Actually, I
What's
was
the next step?
actually in the room when I was negotiating this with General Kari, Chief of Staff of then President Trump. We actually did agree to give the border wall for Dreamers. And then he came back and said, well, now we want to actually take and bring down more legal migration, take out green cards and everything else like that.
Yeah,
so
that's actually not true.
I was actually in the room, and I'm sorry.
Instead of the
Let him
650,000
finish his answer
DACA
first, please, and then we'll...
President Trump tripled it. So
I
we're
promise you a
more.
rebuttal, I promise you.
But back to this is something that actually she has been avoiding. Why don't we just give Dreamers status? Kari Lake, this whole campaign has dodged what would happen with Dreamers. She talks about deportation, but she'll never answer if is she going to deport the Dreamers in this country, because I don't think Dreamers should be deported. Kari Lake keeps avoiding these types of very, very hard answers. And back to, let's talk about this. The bill was actually separated. So eventually, once from pressure from politicians like Kari Lake, who again just want a border problem, won the day, and a lot of Republicans walked away from a border compromise bill that did have a lot of Republican co-sponsors. They separated it out to actually have a separate bill only on the border, and Kari Lake, again, voted no. This is why she doesn't have support of so many of those border mayors. That's why we actually now have 45 Republicans, former electeds and current electeds, have now crossed over and support us, because they understand we take this serious,
This was gonna
not just the
codify
campaign
catch and
rhetoric.
release. This was going to codify
You have
people
1 minute.
pouring across our border. And we
It's also
know,
been
we just
fact-checked,
learned
not
this
true.
week, that 400, roughly 35,000 people have poured across who we knew had criminal records. 50 or 60,000 of them were convicted rapists and murderers. This piece of legislation was a disaster. It would have codified catch and release. I do have a solution. It's called H.R. 2, and it will secure the border. That, along with constructing the border wall quickly, which we can do, and then dealing with the people who've poured in during the Biden invasion, the 20 million people who've come in unvetted into our country. We must deal with them. In order to save our homeland, we must send them back to their homeland. I'm talking about the people who came in unvetted in the past 3.5 years. I'm not talking about the Dreamers. I'm talking about the people who came in the past 3.5 years. Do you want to keep them here? Do you want to deport any of the people who've invaded our country in the last 3.5 years, Ruben? Do you want to deport any of them?
30 seconds.
Yes, actually, we should have a proper deportation proceedings. But I also think that we shouldn't deport Dreamers. Kari Lake, again, is
All
avoiding
20
it.
million of them?
There's not 20 million Dreamers. So let's be clear.
Yeah, let's talk about the Dreamers. You had a chance to make a
You
deal.
are not made clear.
You had a chance to make a deal and you used them
President
as
Trump right now is saying that he's going to
political
deport. She says she's going to deport people. Will you deport Dreamers? Just be honest, yes or no?
No. Dreamers are not. President Trump wanted to make a deal when it came to Dreamers. You said no. Unfortunately, the radical Democrats, like my opponent, would rather use people as political pawns. I want to secure the border, and we're going to do that.
Let's
And
give
right
some
now, we've watched
Mrs. Lake in
as
just a
people
moment.
like Laken Riley's life have been snuffed out. We've watched as 100,000 people a year are taken from us because of fentanyl poisoning.
And
he's allowed the cartels, he's empowered them to continue to funnel fentanyl in.
And Mrs. Lake, I would like to ask, through August of this fiscal year, Customs and Border Patrol reported more than 2 million people caught crossing illegally or deemed inadmissible. 500,000 pounds of drugs seized at ports of entry. What is the bigger threat to you, the flow of migrants or the flow of drugs? 1 minute.
They're both terrible. It's a war against America. We have an invasion of people coming in. And I remember seeing video of they look like soldiers coming in, soldiers from other countries coming in, pouring across our border. And then we have the cartels empowered by Ruben Gallego, trafficking drugs into our state. We are the funnel for fentanyl. I have met so many parents and loved ones on the campaign trail who come up to me and they wait usually till the end of an event. You can spot it. There's a sorrow that you see in their face. And they come up to me at the end of an event. And they say, I lost my son. He was 16 years old. He took a half of what he thought was a Xanax pill, and he's not with us. A 20-year-old daughter, a young mother. We are losing a generation of people. We're losing an entire generation of young people, and you should know better, Ruben. You've even said this. You have admitted that you have a loved one who was a convicted felon drug trafficker, who's trafficked drugs into our country.
Mr. Gallego, a minute to respond to this.
I want to finish this because I feel for you. You got emotional talking about that, a close relative of yours. And for you to continue to vote to empower cartels to bring in fentanyl, which is a weapon of mass destruction, into our country, you talked about the sorrow.
Mr. Gallego, 1 minute.
He talked about the sorrow he felt from having a family member who trafficked drugs and how hard it was for him. And what you're doing to families right now, Ruben, is you're making that be their reality. You're making it so moms and dads out there are losing people because of drugs. Your
Mr.
votes
Gallego.
on the border have empowered the cartels.
You know, I've taken this so seriously that, I was actually in support of a bill that would have brought more technology to the border, that would have actually checked all the scanners. And by the way, that was in the bill that Kari Lake also, again, stood up and said, do not pass it. Not because it wasn't a good solution, because it would have brought a political solution to an end that she needs. She needs this talking point. I take this so seriously that as a member of the Armed Services Committee for the last 10 years, I actually introduced a bill into it called The Buck Stops Here, which helps us track down the sources of money that goes to fentanyl all the way from China to Mexico into the United States. So I do take this seriously. And again, this is why I have more support from elected officials and leaders in this country and in this state than she does. Border mayors that used to campaign with her are now campaigning with me because they don't think that she's serious about this. As a matter of fact, we have 45 Republicans, again, that aren't campaigning with her. And what it seems like, Donald Trump doesn't want to campaign with her anymore either. He's not allowing her pictures on any of his billboards. So this is what we're seeing right now, a candidate that could only talk but doesn't actually produce results.
Well, Mr. Gallego, one of the impacts that we see that's really being felt by border towns that we heard from in the questions that were submitted by voters is that the hospitals in border towns are spending on medical care for migrants. Food banks have been impacted and continue to be stretched.
That's right.
And so now locals worry that there aren't enough resources left for them. So how do you rectify or regulate the financial impact for those communities, especially when we're looking at both for-profit and nonprofit organizations? 2 minutes.
It's a great question, actually. I've been working for, the last 2 years, especially to make sure that we bring money to our border communities. This is money that's been asked by Yuma County, Santa Cruz County, Pima County, Cochise County.
The money in the NGOs that are transporting people.
We're going to give him his time.
Okay, he wants to fund the NGOs that are
I'll give you a response.
So these communities, including these nonprofits that work with our local communities, are essential to actually making sure that the streets aren't full of men just walking around, right? And so what they do, with the help from us through FEMA, which, by the way, she wants to cut these funds, is we made sure that these migrants aren't affecting these small towns. They can't take that impact. And that our local communities, our hospitals, firefighters, law enforcement, ambulances, that they're all reimbursed. Kari Lake, she will do anything and say anything to gain power, including lying.
I haven't had a vote in this. You have had a vote for 10 years, Ruben. Why haven't you voted for
Mrs. Lake.
Has said that
in 1 minute.
That we took money from FEMA, that we took money from FEMA for a hurricane, when in fact we appropriated money specifically for those border communities because they were asked for by these mayors. And now she says we should cut that. She says we should cut that. These mayors, so I hope you'll call the mayor of Douglas, the mayor of Nogales, the mayor of Yuma, and say, hey, because I want to earn points with my friends on these right-wing talk shows, I'm going to cut your funds. Because she's lying right now. She's lying that the money that went to FEMA came from that fund. It actually is going directly to them But of course, it doesn't matter. As long as she gets to get her talking points in and she gets to lie and get power, Arizona, especially our border communities, are the ones that are going to be hurt.
Mrs. Lake, how do you rectify the financial impact for those border communities?
It's
2 minutes.
absolutely horrifying. Hospitals having to close down, hospitals there that aren't being paid because people coming across illegally are getting services and they're not being paid for them. And Ruben's idea is to actually funnel billions of dollars into the NGOs that are actually taking part in transporting people further into our country, not just here in Arizona. Go to the airport. Take a red eye out of Phoenix Sky Harbor. It looks like a migrant encampment because so many people are moving from Phoenix Sky Harbor to all points, all 50 states. And Ruben Gallego has funded that. That's what he wants to do. You know, the real answer, the real solution, Arizona, is not to have to pour billions into all of this, is to shut down the border. Build the border wall that he calls a dumb, stupid border wall. Build the border wall. And then, Ruben, we don't have to pour billions of dollars into the NGOs. The real solution to help these border communities so that they aren't taking a financial hit is to finally put the border wall up and get serious about border security. But Mr. Gallego would rather pour $260 billion of your hard-earned tax dollars into Ukraine to fight for their borders, not our borders. I want to protect you. That's why President Trump, my good friend, has called me Border Kari Lake. I love the nickname, and I'm going to go there to Washington, D.C. and help him build that border wall and secure the border. We can't afford what Kamala Harris and Ruben Gallego have done. Can you imagine he's voted with them 100% of the time for an open border? We're not safe because of it. Fentanyl's falling into the hands of our young people. It's affecting our economy. If you're out there working 1 or 2 jobs, when you bring 20 million people in, they're going to work for peanuts, especially under Ruben Gallego's plan, which is to pay for their housing and give them an EBT card with thousands of dollars on it to pay for their food. They don't have the monthly expenses to live, and so they can work for a reduced wage. It brings your wages down, and it makes all of our families have to struggle even more. And ask the police about it.
Okay.
They're struggling because more crime. How many of you out there know somebody, or you yourself, have been a victim of crime from these Chilean gangs, the dinnertime bandits who broke into homes and are terrorizing people here in the Valley?
Okay, thank you. We're going to dramatically change. I'll give you 30 seconds, and we'll dramatically change topics. Just 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Well, number one, there's been no hospital that's shut down. This money has actually been requested by the communities. This money has been requested by Nogales, by Santa Cruz. They've asked us to work with these nonprofits to release the pressure that they have. She would literally leave these towns abandoned.
No, I would
have you not visited? Why have you not visited them and talked to them? You've been to Mar-a-Lago more than you have to the border. If you had been to the border and actually talked to these towns, talked to these nonprofits, talked to these mayors, they would tell you, we need this or else we're going to have chaos. But you have you're more interested in the talking points. She wants the talking point and says she wants a solution. And Arizona's going to get hurt. Arizona's going to get hurt.
You have hurt Arizona. I've been to the border
we've
more
given you
times.
a chance on this.
I've been to the border more times than you've probably been to Arizona.
Mr. Gallego, let's switch topics to abortion, reproductive rights. If you were in the Senate, would you either vote to make abortion codified in the U.S. Constitution, or would you vote for a ban, or would you find somewhere in the middle? Do you think federal officials, federal government at this point should be involved in this issue at all?
I would codify Roe. Okay. It is absolutely abhorrent that my 15-month-old daughter has less rights and control of her body than her mother and then her grandma. The fact that we have women that are now going to sepsis just so they could get a life-saving abortion. We have women that are traveling with their daughters that are victims of rape out of state so they could get an abortion. A 10-year-old baby girl, victim of incest, had to leave her home state and the comfort of her family to get an abortion. And the reason we need to codify that is because people like Kari Lake are the ones that make this a dangerous situation. This is a person who only 2 years ago, actually less than 2 years ago, said the 1864 territorial law, a law that said if you were an abortion provider, it was a mandatory 2-year sentence, and it had no exceptions for rape or incest, was a great law. She said it was a great law. She said she was thrilled when Roe was overturned. And then when she was disappointed to find out that the 1864 law, again, the one that had no exceptions for rape or incest, was not going to get enforced, she said, well, I hope the sheriffs will do their jobs. Can you imagine?
Not true.
We have it on tape. These are all your words on tape. Can you imagine Sheriff Joe Arpaio enforcing abortion laws? This is who Kari Lake is. She has told us what she would do. She said it. She said she was thrilled when Roe was overturned. And so, do we want politicians like Kari Lake to be involved in these very, very difficult decisions when they should be left to the woman,
To
the
the
doctor,
states.
and the family?
Okay, Mrs. Lake, you have 2 minutes.
It should be left to the states. I agree with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She said this should be a decision left to the states. Everyone knew it was unconstitutional. And Arizona, and I want to speak to the women of Arizona. I'm the only woman on this stage right now. I don't think I'm standing next to a woman. And so I understand how difficult these choices may be. And we have the choice as Arizonans to decide what our abortion law will be. It's going to be up to us, and we're going to decide in November when we go and cast our ballot. And Ruben Gallego wants to take that choice away from us. He wants to take it back to the federal government in some back room with Chuck Schumer and decide what our abortion law will be here in Arizona. It's going to be up to us. I want us to have that choice, and whatever the law ends up being, whatever our choice ends up being, I will respect. I come from a large family. I'm the youngest of 9. And we had 8 girls, so I know a lot about women. I have a daughter myself, and I want to make sure that we have the choice to decide what our abortion law is here in Arizona. He knows, and Steve, you know this as well, we're running for federal office. This isn't going to be decided in the Senate. This is not. And I will tell you this, I will never pass a federal abortion ban, nor will I approve or vote for federal tax dollars being used for abortion. But here's what I will do, because I'm a mother and I care deeply about women. And because things have gotten so desperate in this country, more and more people are choosing to have an abortion because they can't afford to live, let alone take care of a baby. I don't want any woman out there to make that choice because she can't afford to live, because of the votes that people like Ruben Gallego have made that have made our economy practically collapse. It's on life support right now. So I want to go to the U.S. Senate and pass the most pro-family legislation. I want to make sure that UVF is protected. I have many friends who are here. They're my friends today because of UVF. And I have many of my friends who have had children and experienced the joy of motherhood and parenthood because of UVF. This is sad because Ruben Gallego doesn't really care about women's rights. When it comes to our women, our girls who are athletes, he wants us to have to compete against men, biological men.
To follow up, you said that you would not support a federal ban. Do you stand by that if Proposition 139 here in Arizona that would override our state ban, would you still not pursue a federal ban?
First of all, we don't have a state ban. We have a 15-week abortion law that was passed by both Democrats and Republicans, signed into law by both Hobbs and Governor Ducey. And so we don't have an abortion ban. But I will not pass a federal abortion ban in the United States Senate. Ruben Gallego wants to take the choice away from us. He doesn't really care about women's rights. If he cared about women's rights, first of all, I'm astounded that he actually knows the difference between a woman and a man, because I thought there were, 147 different genders. I do care about women's rights. I come from a family of women, and I have a daughter of my own and many nieces and nephews. And I care about Laken Riley's right to exist and live and be safe. But his votes have caused it to where people are pouring across our border, dangerous people, taking away the lives of women. I care about the ability for our daughters to be able to participate in athletics. He doesn't want that. And he doesn't care about your First Amendment right to the women out there who might disagree with him politically. He wants to censor you. So let's talk about women's rights. Women care about a lot of different issues, Ruben. I know you spent, $40 million on attack ads regarding abortion. Think of how many lives could have been saved and how many women could have been helped with $40 million. And think about what we could have done to help make our country a better place with all those attack ads.
Mr. Gallego,
Yes.
I'm going to give you a minute to respond, and I also want you to clarify, because you said you would vote to uphold Roe on a federal level. So that means that states can only intervene in the 3rd trimester.
That's correct. We'd go back to what were the protections we had for the last 50 years on Roe. Now, Kari Lake also, I think, misspoke, to give her credit, where she said that the 15-week ban is good, and it's not a ban. There's also, within that current law, no exceptions for incest and rape. So again, we're going back to what she originally was saying not too long ago, when she said this very restrictive law that had no exceptions for rape or incest. that would have jailed providers was a great law. Someone that was willing to look at a mother and say, I know your daughter was raped, but she does not have a right to an abortion. She was willing to say that just 2 years ago. And now we're going to trust her? We're going to trust her now? I mean, this is the same person that's still lying about winning the 2022 election. And yet we're going to trust her. She's failed the basic test of honesty. Why would we trust her with our daughters?
Mr. Gallego, Mrs.
Can I
Lake, I'm going
respond to
to
that
ask
really
you
quickly?
specifically. I want to ask
Can I
you
just
about
respond real quickly to
30
what he
seconds.
said? He acts like he cares about us. I want to speak to the women out there, but when you look at his character and his background, he has been harassing women and being disparaging toward women from the very beginning. When he worked at City Hall, he had a complaint about a hostile work environment and being hostile toward women. He went over to the legislature, he had a sexual harassment filed against him in the legislature. People go crying out of his office. This is a man who is putting on his Extreme Makeover Act, and what you see behind the scenes is not somebody who cares about
Mrs.
women.
Lake, we want to get some specifics for voters
Sure.
because you did mention that you have a plan to support those catch services. So things like state foster and adoptive services, mental health services for women in postpartum care. What is your plan to support those services?
I'm so
1
glad
minute,
you
please.
mentioned that because that gets mentioned so infrequently in this discussion. You talked about we've talked about abortion, but we haven't talked about adoption. And there's so many families out there who would love to adopt a child. I just saw a statistic and it broke my heart. It said that 60% of women who have an abortion would have chosen not to have one if they knew there was financial help out there or emotional help. And so if we are just offering a little bit of help to women, they will choose to have that baby. And so I want to make sure that those choices are out there. And a lot of these you mentioned are state programs, so that would be done at the state level. But anything we can do in the federal government to assist in that, we need bigger families. We need families out there. Our birth rate is dropping to a precipitous level, actually dangerous. And we can't just import new populations. We want to have families growing. And so I want to make sure we've got child tax credit, we have support. You know, I just believe deeply in how beautiful and wonderful families are, coming from a big family myself.
Thank you.
We didn't have much, but we had love, and a big family is a really special thing. So I want to make sure that women have
Lake.
that
And
ability.
Mr. Gallego, 1 minute. Would you try to work in something on a federal level to provide better services for families who are trying to afford their children, and if any of the stricter state abortion bans are upheld?
Well, certainly we
1
should
minute.
make sure we continue with some of the great work we did with the child tax credit. That brought childhood poverty down by 60%, which, by the way, Kari Lake was against when the bill was on the floor. We should also move into child care. Right now, child care is more expensive than sending your kid to ASU. So these are the things that we should be doing as often as we can to make sure that we're making, every day a little better. I'd like to do also just to point out that there was just a lot of personal hits that were just thrown there, and we won't go through every lie, but
I would actually be interested in doing that because
You-
I'm curious why you have an intern fired.
the current
Why did
state
you have an intern
representative
fired?
The state representative actually
complained about being harassed.
that she is talking about actually sent her an email asking her to stop because what she claims happened did not happen. We're actually friends, and she's supporting us. She's supporting this campaign. Number two, this is a trend you're going to see with Kari Lake. Whenever she doesn't have an answer, she just goes for personal attack because she has no good answer on abortion. She will ban abortions. She was willing to tell a mom that your daughter cannot have an abortion even if she was raped just 2 years ago.
We're going to move on. We're going to move on to the economy because both of you have a lot of things to say about that. Mrs. Lake, I want to ask you a very specific question. And I want to get some ideas from you because there are a lot of people who are in the state of Arizona who, regardless of the stock market going up or unemployment being low, they're wondering, they're struggling right now. They have to work two jobs. They're not sure what to do. But what does a living wage look like to you? And how, as a senator, would you help people in Arizona get to a point where they could afford housing? They don't feel like they're up against the wall every month.
I'm so glad you're asking these questions because this is the #1 issue for Arizonans. There's so many big problems right now, but people are struggling. I was talking to a woman in the West Valley, and she'll remember the conversation we had. She talked about how she volunteers, and she's volunteered for decades at the food bank, even giving food, volunteering her time. And she said, for the first time in my life, I've had to go to that food bank and ask for help because I don't have enough money to get through the end of the week. And so we have to do something. And it starts with bringing down the cost of everything. The cost of everything. We have been affected most, especially in Ruben Gallego's district, with inflation. Housing prices are on the rise. They've gone up 35%. I talked about when I first moved here and bought a house, a 3-bedroom house for $88,000. It's not affordable. And it goes right back to the American Rescue Act, the American Rescue Plan, which was anything but a rescue. It actually sent us spiraling and put our economy on life support. Obama and Obama's Treasury Secretary warned Ruben Gallego and the Democrats, do not sign this piece of legislation into law or it will send inflation skyrocketing up. That's exactly what they did. They did not heed the warning. They signed it into law, and that's why the price of everything has gone up. The price of eggs up over 100%. The average monthly mortgage payment has gone up 105% here in Arizona. And we have 3 cities that actually have the highest jump in rent payments every single month, and that's Tucson, Mesa, and Phoenix. So one of the things I want to do is secure the border. When you have 20 million people and we're competing for goods and services with people, it's a basic supply and demand. But we also have to work to bring down the cost of everything, and we have to make sure that we're not printing money and bringing inflation up. There's only one entity that can create inflation. That is the government. They have pushed for more spending, more spending, more spending, and that means more printing of money. And that's why your dollar is only worth 75 cents today. It was worth $1 under President Trump. It's only 75 cents under Kamala Harris.
1 minute to respond. How do you make living more affordable for your constituents?
Well, first of all, the minimum wage should be $15, and it should be pegged to inflation, so it actually keeps moving up. Number 2, you fight inflation by actually looking at how you can bring down costs. Number 1, we have a big opportunity right now. We need to stop the merger of the grocery stores in Arizona. By allowing Kroger and Albertsons to merge, they're going to have 70% of all grocery store controlling customers. That'll raise prices. And we already saw a lot of the grocery stores already gouging our consumers. Kari Lake, by the way, went on record and says she didn't think there was any gouging of consumers at grocery stores, even though executives from these grocery stores under oath said they did do it. But we also need to continue doing some of the things that we have done. We've passed legislation that mandates that our government negotiates the prices of prescription drugs. We've capped insulin at $35. Next year's seniors, they're going to have their prescription drugs capped at a total of $2,000. That's the kind of stuff we're going to do. And then we have to make sure we fight these big corporations that are taking up 1/3 of all the homes recently. And by the way, Kari Lake wants to allow them to keep buying those homes, and then now she's going to give them a tax cut next year.
All right, I need each of you a 30-second answer on this. Trump tax cuts, would you vote to extend them?
Yes, I would. And by the way, you're about to see the extreme makeover version of Ruben. He's going to say he's now for the Trump tax cuts when he's been against them. We're not only going to extend the Trump tax cuts, we're going to make sure that we're not making anybody who's a senior citizen on its Social Security pay taxes on their Social Security check. No more taxes on tips and no more taxes on overtime. We got to stop printing money like it's going out of style. That's what Ruben Gallego, Kamala Harris, and the Democrats have done. And we're going to start cutting back on the wasteful spending in the government. It's outrageous what they want to spend money on. For example,
I gave you 30 seconds. I apologize. 30 seconds on tax policy, Mr. Gallego. 30 seconds.
We need to keep the middle class portion of the tax cuts. The tax cuts to the corporations that made billions of dollars of price gouging, those need to go up. She actually wants to give them a bigger tax cut than they already have. That's ridiculous.
Arizona,
we need to negotiate. We need to also make sure, we also need to bring in a child tax credit as part of that Trump tax cut. But giving more tax cuts to people that haven't been paying their fair share and price gouging our Arizonans at the same time is unfair, and Kari Lake will do that.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake, I'm going to ask you because you mentioned it specifically. You mentioned Social Security specifically.
Yeah.
How do you maintain it? Because Arizona has one of the highest populations of seniors, and they're worried about this. How do you maintain Social Security without privatizing it? 30 seconds, please.
I want people who are on Social Security to know you have paid into that. That is an insurance benefit you've paid into, and we are not touching that. Ruben Gallego, Kamala Harris, and the Democrats will decimate it. They want to make it so you can't, the age that you have to be to qualify to get your Social Security, they want to raise that, and they also want to take Medicare. He promised he wouldn't touch Medicare. They wouldn't raise or ruin Medicare and touch it, and they have. He wants Medicare for all, which really means Medicaid for all, and that will be a disaster for Arizona families. I have to mention the prescription drug prices. He touts that he brought that down. His vote in the Inflation Reduction Act actually caused medications to go up for people on Part
Thank
D.
you.
57% increase in price.
Thank you.
Because of
Mr.
his
Gallego,
vote.
I'm going to give you 1 minute to respond to that and also talk about Social Security.
Sure, and this has been fact-checked. We did not support, did not raise Social Security. As a matter of fact, we've actually increased the solvency of Medicare by negotiating for drugs. For the first time, our pharma has to negotiate for the cost of drugs to our seniors. The fact that she wants to keep that, I don't even know where to go with that. Social Security has to be saved. I've been working since the age of 14. The money that I put into Social Security when I was working in the meatpacking factory is the money that I've earned. My mom's about to join the community too. She's about to be retired. I want her to have Social Security, and there's so many Arizonans that rely on it. But the way to do that is to be realistic. We need to raise the cap when it comes to security. People that make more than $400,000 a year are going to have the caps raised, and that's going to increase the solvency and payout of Social Security 100% all the way to 2060. That's how we bring security. That's how this is done. And this has been checked by economists, and that's the best way you could do that to make sure it happens.
Done this? You
This is
have
like
a
we'll give you
Democrat
30 seconds,
president.
please.
He's got a Democrat president. I think we have a Democrat president. I don't know, frankly, who's running the country right now. But why haven't you done that, Ruben? We've had a Democrat president. Your
Jump in.
first day on the job.
Actually do
your
have a
first day
bill.
on the job was 10 years ago.
So I actually
And
do
you
have a
haven't done
bill, Social Security Act of 2100, that exactly does that. And love to have the Republicans not stop the bill and filibuster it also, but of course I'll continue working on that. And this is the difference between me and Kari Lake. Like, I actually try to work on things. She just has talking points. So just talk and not really know what she's saying.
Well, it's interesting because he's voted with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Arizona, you got to know this. He's voted with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden 100% of the time. He wants to act like he's bipartisan. He was the leader of the Progressive Caucus. That's where all the ideas that we scratch our head and go, who came up with these crazy ideas, come from.
This is like, I'm going to cut you off so we can move on to other topics.
Okay.
We're almost running out of time. So, two hottest summers in recorded history, last couple of summers in Phoenix. Whether it is human caused or whether it is cyclical, there certainly is a climate difference going on here in Arizona. What are some ideas you have to make sure we're ready to have enough energy and enough water here in the state if, in fact, we do get hotter?
Well, I wouldn't do what the Democrats did, which was take a great energy policy that President Trump had put in place and decimated on day one, hour one, like Joe Biden did with the support of my opponent. We definitely can't do that. We need to bring back and start building the Keystone XL pipeline and continue, as President Trump says, to drill, baby, drill. I want to look at all sources of energy. We absolutely need plentiful energy that's inexpensive and reliable. We want reliable energy. The price of electricity has gone up some 30%. I was reading an article the other day of a woman who's a retiree who has to keep her house at 83. She keeps the windows and shades closed because she just can't afford to cool her house. We need to bring the price of energy down. And unfortunately, with the moves the Democrats did right when they got into office, it caused a spike in energy prices. Only now are they realizing they're in trouble, and they're starting to drill once again. But the Democrats want us to be reliant on foreign energy. Foreign energy with Middle East and Venezuela. They don't want us to have our own energy. We've got to look at all sources of energy. I want to look at everything. Everything should be on the table to use that's, like I said, cheap and reliable.
Mr. Gallego, we'll give you 2 minutes to respond to that. Environment plus energy.
Well, look, we have to first accept that climate change is happening. And so we prepare by that by actually having a very resilient grid. We need to bring in more baseload energy, and that's going to have to be nuclear. That's the quickest thing we could do to make sure that we could continue the growth that we have in Arizona with the manufacturing and residential to make sure that we can meet that. Number two, she didn't bring up water. This is Arizona. She should have brought up water. But we need to make sure that we're making water investments to deal with the drought that is caused by climate change. So that means we need to make sure that we have more water reclamation projects. We're going to have more transference projects. We're going to have to cover our canals to stop evaporation. In the 2026 negotiations that are coming up, we're probably going to have to cut about 760 acre-feet of water, which is going to be very dangerous to some of our farmers. They're going to be shut off from that. So these are the real things that she should be doing. But she's in denial about climate change.
Well,
but we should not be surprised by that. She's still in denial about the 2022 election. And now I give you 1 minute. You have 1 minute. Will you finally tell the people of Arizona, did you win or lose that election?
Can I talk about water really quickly? Because
I'm going to give you 30
we
seconds to respond, and please talk about water.
Are
30
we
seconds,
also talk
please.
about water separately?
We're running out of time, so
okay,
30 seconds.
Let's talk about water. He's had 10 years in Congress. He's done nothing. I've lived here for 30 years, and I've watched as politicians continue to say we have a water crisis. We are in the West, and we need to look at long-term solutions. I'm not talking about fighting over a drop of water. We can conserve, but we can't conserve our way out of this crisis. Otherwise, we'll end up giving the short end of the stick to our ag community and our ranchers, and we'll have a food crisis before we have a water crisis. I want to go to Washington, D.C. and work on true solutions, piping in fresh water, desalination, but finally, for once and for all, bringing in new sources of water to the West. The West is growing. We don't want to be scrounging over water. We want to have plentiful water sources, and I'm going to do it. I'm sick of watching politicians like Ruben do nothing.
Mrs. Lake, before we run out of time, and we do want to get to this last topic as well, as Mr. Gallego has brought up, you have both made your stance on previous elections clear, but we want to know, public perception is, at least in Arizona, that something seems to go wrong every time. So what specifically can be supported in the Senate to restore faith and confidence regardless of who wins or loses in elections?
You know, we've had problems across the country since 2000. One year the Democrats are mad, the next year the Republicans are. We've got problems with our elections. And there's no doubt about it. The people of Arizona have been burned. They're tired of hearing about hiccups and loopholes and problems that happen on election day. We just want to make sure that our legal vote counts. My opponent wants illegal votes to count. He actually voted twice to have illegals vote. He voted against the SAVE Act, which would prevent illegals from voting. I want every legal vote to count. I don't care if you are the most liberal Democrat or the most conservative Republican, or where most of Arizona is, somewhere in between. I want every legal vote to count. My solution would be, let's get back to something closer to what we used to have. Election day, paper ballots, and we know the results right there on the night of the election. But we definitely can't have people pouring across our country illegally voting. Not only does he want to let them vote, he wants to give them all asylum. And we've got to stop this nonsense at the border and restore our country.
1 minute to respond.
This is Kari Lake. Whenever she doesn't have an answer, she goes to the border or to a personal hit. Number one, this has already been fact-checked. I'm not for illegals voting. Number two, this is a person that has shown no leadership and has been quite the opposite. She has caused harm to Arizona. She's caused harm and has made it a laughing stock, and that's dangerous. She has 14 lawsuits. She's currently suing to be reinstated as governor. She has caused Stephen Richer, a Republican, a good Republican, to have to go get private security because of all her threats that she caused upon him, to the point where he sued for defamation, and she admitted that she lied about him. Now she's just waiting for the judge to say how much she's going to have to pay him. And Bill Gates, another Republican, and Clint Hickman. So this is what we're talking about. She just also said that she wants to get rid of vote by mail. So what we're seeing here is Kari Lake, again, who still has not accepted that she lost the 2022 election. She is dangerous to Arizona. She will say anything. She will do anything to win. But Arizona is the one that is losing right now.
30 seconds. How do you address public perception when it comes to elections and feeling confident?
Well, what you do is what you actually have seen Secretary of State Fontes, Republican county supervisors, as well as county recorders. You show leadership. You go and you go through the process. You work in a bipartisan manner to actually instill trust and have people learn about the process, not actually do what Kari Lake does. She exploits it. She has a nonprofit to fight the steal, but we don't even know what she's been using the money for. As a matter of fact, she's still holding up the judge in terms of discovery so he could see how much she owes Stephen Richer for lying about the election.
All right, thank you. And 30 seconds to respond.
I've never lied to the people of Arizona. I want to put that out right now. Unfortunately, we're watching the great, extreme makeover of Ruben Gallego, but I've never lied to the people of Arizona, and I just want to have honest elections.
I apologize. I want to make sure that I get to your closing statements.
My vote to count and your vote to count.
Because it is time. Our time is up, so we want to get to your closing statements. Make sure that you have that full minute to keep us on time. We will politely cut you off when we get to the end of the minute. Mr. Gallego, you do have the first closing statement. Your time starts now.
Well, thank you, Arizona. Look, I'm a very lucky man. I'm just lucky to be born in the best country in this world. And, by all accounts, I shouldn't even be here. My mom raised us alone. And, through real belief in the American dream and a real want to succeed, I got to where I am. And my sisters. We have doctors, we have teachers, we have businesswomen in our small family. And we are a true story of the American dream. And I want every Arizonan to be able to fulfill that and have that opportunity. But you have dangerous situation. We're at a crossroads here. We have dangerous leaders like Kari Lake who will lie to you. She's still lying to you right now. She is trying to take away your vote and disrespecting you by saying that she still won the 2022 election. How could you trust someone like that who's willing to lie to you all the way to the end? This is better. Arizona, we are better than this. And we are a great state that's going to be becoming greater if we work together and not divide.
That's your time. Kari Lake, you have 1 minute.
Arizona, thank you for tuning in tonight. And I'm looking forward to being your next U.S. Senator and bringing back a strong, secure border, that strong Trump economy where everybody was doing better no matter what color your skin, what neighborhood you were from, what your political ideology is. We want to make sure we have a strong economy once again. We want to fully fund our police. My opponent called to defund the police when he was marching in the BLM riots and calling police officers racist and actually the bad guys. And that's very unfortunate. I want every police officer and their family to know I fully support you. We will fully fund the police. We're going to need you to make our streets safe again after all of the crime that's poured in with an open border. On day one, we're going to get to work to secure the border. We're going to get the criminals who've invaded our country out, and we're going to bring back that strong, thriving economy. And I want to tell something out there if there's any kiddos watching. I don't want you to worry. I want you to dream really big. I want you to know that we're going to turn this country around and your American dream will become reality.
Thank you both for being
Arizona.
here tonight. We appreciate your time.
And that is all the time that we have, and we thank you for watching.